Now we got it organized and working. I haven't even said a word yet. Actually, now I'm saying words. What have I been doing? Well, I've been thinking to myself, oh my god, oh my god, oh my god, it's not even in line. It's not even lined up. Oh my god. Oh my god. Okay. Like. There we go, I think. Or actually. Okay, there we have it. There we have it. There we have it. Alright. In today's video, I have been thinking a lot. You know? Like, there are some things that I want to say, but I don't know if YouTube will let me. I guess they will. But look. I think my generation is a little too early on the nostalgia train. Even if you're really old, it's like, why be so nostalgic over some bullshit you're gonna forget anyways? And even if you do remember this kind of stuff, you know, it's not like you can go back, because once time travel gets invented, you're gonna be like, why did I even want to live here anyway? Because everybody likes the aesthetics of the past. Everybody likes the idea of being in the past. But nobody actually wants to live in the past. You know? That kind of thing. Because basically what they're saying is they want others to do it. You know? In some cases. But sometimes they want to do it too. But seriously, I do not want to go back to 2016. Okay? It's a terrible year. Alright? That was a very bad year for me personally. Okay? My worst 3 years of my life so far have been 2024, 2022, and my number one worst year, 2016. I know I'm probably oversimplifying or making it sound way worse. But look, I'm going to be honest with you. A lot of people, what they mean by, oh, it was simpler times, is I just like the idea of being in this thing, not actually, having that kind of stuff. Because who would want 2016 problems? You know what I mean? Like, we don't need to be post-Gamergate era, you know? That's what 2016 was. It was the beginning of the post-Gamergate era, which lasted for about 4-6 years, that kind of thing. And then Gamergate 2 came along around 2022, and yeah, we're still in Gamergate 2, the second one. But I would say somewhere around 2027 or 2028, it may be the end of Gamergate 2. So, yeah. We're just in the last stretches of that era. But once we get out of it, Generation Alpha is on their way to do whatever, that kind of thing. And speaking of generations, you know what? People really thought that the 6-7 meme was going to die out with 2025. It didn't, Like, there was a whole trend for a while in 2025 and 2024 and 2023, specifically in those years, where it's like, oh, we have to leave these things in this year, and then we didn't leave those things in that year, like vaping. They were like, oh, we need to leave this in this year, and then it got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. The only thing I can really think of that got left of in its year, in its prime year, was red pill. Okay? Blue pill kind of sticked around, and red pill sort of still exists, but blue pill, because it got big because of red pill, red pill eventually fractured off and became black pill, and eventually became, um, you know, the groypers, you know, or what we now call the groypers anyway. And for the blue pill, it's separated into a bunch of other movements, and then eventually, looks maxing was also a part of it, but it was also associated with red pill too. But eventually, once it splintered off and, started to go out of relevancy, they started moving on to other things like the fat positivity movement, and then once that movement got so big that it died out, then what happened is you had looks maxing. And do you know what splintered off from looks maxing? IRL maxing. Yep. Well, actually, it was originally a part of blue pill, but it slowly morphed into its own thing, and then it was sort of a part of it, but it became its own separate movement, and I'm just somebody who so happened to give it a name, okay? I didn't necessarily found it in the sense of, like, I invented IRL maxing. I'm more of, like, the founding, like, guy of naming it, Like, for example, memes were always kind of a thing. People don't really understand, but like the modern idea of a meme, that hasn't always existed, but the traditional idea of a meme, where it's like a culture or like a cultural thing or like a like usually mostly with humor nowadays. Basically, it's limited, where its humor is like from a certain time, It makes you more aware of your own time, that kind of thing. But now it's mostly just a modern word for, insert current humor. And a lot of things that I noticed generationally is, well, generationally speaking, how Generation Z, for example, would hold on to a trend, because every generation had trends, kind of, but it was mostly a rich people thing. But even then, it used to take thousands of years just to convince people to do something slightly differently, Whereas now it's like, people will change their whole entire existence in a couple of hours, or in a couple of minutes, all the time, Like, yeah, that was always kind of a thing, but it never became mainstream until recently, That's the crazy part. So who knows what people will think of my time in the future? Simply for the sheer fact that, well, it'd just be so different. Well, my now is even way different than your now. But again, let's keep talking about Generation Z here. That name Generation Z is a social construct. But it's a social construct that is intentionally made to divide people. And younger people tend to be more ageist than older people, because older people, they have lived for so long that they just either don't care, or if they do care, it's because it's like, oh, I had it bad when I was your age, kind of thing. Whereas younger generations tend to be more prejudiced, against people who are younger than them and people who are older than them, but mostly younger than them, because older than them, it's like, oh yeah, you spawned here earlier before I did, so, I feel less superior to you. But when you're just a day younger, I want to mock you out of existence. Like, that's basically what it is. Especially with Generation Z. I mean, it's not the only generation that does it, and it's not the generation that does it the most. It's just the generation that does it the most obviously. You know, it's the most obvious way that they do it. But the generation that does it the most, just straight up, would be the millennials. The millennials are famous for that. Okay? Generation X kind of fade off with Facebook, but like, definitely the fucking millennials, okay? But, you know, millennials had their trends, you know, Generation X had their trends, and the boomers, ooh, they're kind of famous for doing trends as a generation, you know? But it also is very, like, cultural and societal, and even depends on your language, too, you know? And a whole bunch of other things. Excuse me, I dropped a cup. You know, down to the individual. But it's just the boomers are a lot more united because monoculture, when they became adults, monoculture was at its peak, was at its cultural height during its golden age. Okay? That's when they became adults. So they completely united mostly over things that were actually controversial, you know? Whereas today, things can be controversial, but to somebody else, it's like, oh, no, that's not controversial, you know? Because you'll have one person who's like, everything needs to be about politics and religion, and everything is about politics and religion. And then you have people that are like, I don't want to hear about it, I don't want to talk about it, I don't want to associate with it, you know? But it's like a spectrum of a spectrum of a spectrum of a spectrum. And Generation Z, and okay, I'm going to get to my point here. When they see a trend, and it took me like 13 minutes, but when they see a trend, they'll look at it and they'll keep going, especially if it's on the niche end or whatever, because niche is the new mainstream, you know? What it really just means to say is they're getting away with being sellouts, okay? Just because Justin Bieber got away with being a fucking sellout doesn't mean you can, alright? Justin Bieber. The only socially acceptable person, in my opinion, that I would, you know, let get away with being a sellout was Michael Jackson, because he's Michael Jackson, and also he's dead. So there's that for context, and also Michael Jordan, because MJ to MJ, I guess. Anyway, they keep going, they keep going, they keep going with the trend, but once it hits the height of its popularity, or when it looks like it's near the height of its popularity, guess what? Guess fucking what? I'm telling you this right now. They're just like, nope, we don't want to be a part of this no more. As it's getting more popular, or like, you know, just going out to the mainstream more, then yeah, they'll be a part of it. But once the trend starts getting more and more popular, they're going to be less interested into it. That's why no trend could truly last, you know, because 2016 was the last year that millennials could truly, you know, own Generation Z, kind of, you know. It was their last stride. That's why they have nostalgia for it. And then Generation Z for a while became the cool kids, you know, using skull emojis for some reason. I don't know what that trend was all about. I mean, I get that it can symbolize death or whatever, but it's like, if you use it in insert current year, the way that Generation Z used it in 2022, you're irrelevant, okay? In every sense of the word. Now, I'm irrelevant, I'm out of touch, but like, I'm not that out of touch, you know? Like that kind of thing. And also, it kind of fucked, because like, it's really, really hard for people to just do things, you know? Because once it gets to the height of its popularity, it's like, oh no, you're going corporate. Oh no, you're going too much with the trends, you know? You're too out there, you know? You're too popular. You know, they're like, why isn't monoculture working with Generation Z? Because what is considered popular amongst Generation Z goes down to the individual. So it's a lot harder to define, you know? And then Generation Alpha, it's like, basically, unless in their daily lives they see another trend that outbeats that specific trend, they're just going to keep doing it. That's why 6-7 is still around. Because, yes, it was the first Generation Alpha trend, but it was also the first Generation Alpha trend to be exclusively pretty much that generation. In other words, it's not Generation Z. They're not really like Generation Z in that term of trend. So, until something replaces it, it's just going to stay semi-relevant, or it's just going to be mostly relevant for a while, you know? So, that's just how they are, you know? They're just going to keep doing it until something else in that specific category of relevancy gets to it. Ooh, I have no idea what they're going to be like when they're like the age that Generation Z is now, you know? Or Generation Beta. Who knows what they'll be doing by the time, you know, they'll say be old enough to be president, you know? That's gonna be crazy, you know? That's gonna be insane. If you ask me, you know? All this because in the 2028 election, you're gonna have people born in 2010 voting for whoever is gonna be president for the first time. That's shocking. That's concerning. Really concerning. But look. Not the end of the world. Or is it? I don't know. Have you ever noticed that election years in the U.S., at least for the presidential election, is always on a leap year? You ever notice that? Anyway, why is it that every single time that the World Cup does, you know, the World Cup year, like in 2026, the time I uploaded this video, for real this time, why is it almost, not every time, but almost every time, whenever, you know, that company puts the World Cup final in a country, they're always like in regime time, you know? Like they're always like in some big regime thing going on. QAnon. Well, not QAnon. I mean, I don't know what happened to that. They're still around, I know that, but like, kind of weird, you know? Like you, that kind of name sounds like the name of a country. I don't know why, but it does. You know? That kind of thing. But man, oh man. They're out there going all crazy. Ooh, mama. Are you diabetic? Are you stupid as hell? Maybe. Maybe I am. I have a cup. This cup represents you being chronically online. Okay? Let's say. Alright? Let's say this is you. What are you going to do when you don't have internet anymore? Or at least in a situation where you have to be offline. What are you gonna do? Are you gonna panic and be online more and more? No. You're gonna handle it like a human. Or if you're not human, handle it like you're somebody who can handle this thing. And just do whatever you gotta do if you need to do it. Or if you want to do it. You know? Or have to do it. You know, have to. The sarcasm. If you don't know what this means when I do the bunny ears, it doesn't mean focus. What it means is they're using sarcasm, okay? Because people in the US are so bad at sarcasm, they literally have to have a hand gesture just to do that. And you know those little like those two little apostrophes, not apostrophes, those two little things. Normally they usually have one for like, plural words in English. You know how they have like two of those at the end, in the beginning and the end of a word? That kind of thing. And basically it has to do with punctuation. You have those two symbols. And, well, people use it to make sarcasm or whatever, or to say they did this, it makes it stand out more. Well, this symbol that I'm doing with my hands is the equivalent of that. Okay? It's just a sarcasm symbol usually. At least in most forms of the English-speaking world. But it does get regional, depending on where you live. If you live outside of the U.S., that is. Or if you are in the U.S. You're from goddamn Wyoming. Don't ask questions. Or maybe do ask questions. You know what? Ask questions. You might go, why? Because I said so. So now ask them. Ask your questions. Or maybe give answers. Should you give answers? But why? You got slapped, like they put that in your head. But Michael, but I'm chronically online and I have a sucky ass life. Okay. What are you gonna do? You're the one who said it. I know I'm talking to myself through a camera, but look. I could also be talking to somebody else right now. No, I did not get deported from Switzerland. But look, what I can say is this. Yeah, man. you're gonna get so offended over that. Nigga. Man. I just sit here and think to myself. What is the true meaning of life? You ask me, it's a open world, free will, what do you call it? Not one person, it's POV game. First person game. You know? That kind of thing. And not 9 months to install, it's 9 months loading screen, okay? You install instantly. And it takes 9 months to load it all up. And they say it's about 8 billion, more like 12 billion, but we're not ready for that story yet. Shut the fuck up, okay? Shh. It's actually 1 billion, but we're exaggerating the numbers so far we don't even realize how fake it is. Nah, I'm just kidding. We're not actually that small anymore. Haven't been that way for a long time. Or maybe. But whatever. You know, the true meaning of life, what is it? What is it? Why should I care? Why should I even know? Good question. Why should you care? I don't know. That's the thing. I really don't know, man. Life hurts or doesn't. Life can be good. Life can be great. But that depends if you want it to be great, if you want it to be good. Not just want it, but actually make it good. Make it great. Whatever that means to you. You know? I don't know where I'm getting with this. Maybe you need to think about this to yourself. Maybe I need to. What could it be? Could it be Jesus Christ? Could it be fucking, what was his name? Mohammed? Could it be Buddha? Could it be Dharma? I don't think that's... No, I think I'm confusing it with something else. Could it be Odin? Could it be Zeus? Could it be Socrates? I don't know. I'm out here with my head, you know? I can exploit you for who you are, they say. Dog, I'm not even a main character. I'm somebody who's self-aware. I'm a side character in my own story. The fuck? Why am I the Witcher? Shit. Fuck. Man, it's really hard to remember stuff. You know? Like, we live in a society where it's like people will forget something as soon as it's said to them or during, you know? Or they'll forget it before it even happens. So they have no idea what they're getting into. That's why debates are so shitty now. Because people can't remember shit. And also because debates are just kind of retarded, you know? It's just complaining at each other for money. Like, you can do that for free. All you have to do is just go on Reddit, Discord, Twitter X, Instagram, YouTube, Twitch, Kick, Rumble, 4chan, and maybe, just maybe, Gmail. Peak, bro. And I tell you right now, man, the government could go full authoritarian mode. There's nothing I can really do about it other than acknowledge it, if I can. But if it does happen, well, I'm going to be fighting for my freedom here. You know? If that means they're going to take out the internet and everything, and they're going to do all this stuff, then so be it. You know? But look. I don't know why I did that. I don't remember what I was going to say. Memory ain't great. Memory ain't great. You know? I really, really wish I could remember things. I just don't. I just really don't. Over here talking to myself. You know, I'm something of a human myself. And I exist. But why? You know? But I have, at least to my knowledge, free will. Oh wait, yeah, that's right. It doesn't matter how bad my country gets, where I live here in the United States. Doesn't matter how crazy it will be. That means I have to live the rest of my life defending my own nation. You know, at least if it still exists by the time you're watching this. If that means I have to defend it, and if that means I have to stand for my people for my entire life, then so be it. If that means I have to, live inside this high mind of a place, so be it. If that means I have to live in some totalitarian dictator, communist shithole, then I'm gonna have to deal with that. Fight for freedom. If that means I die, I die. If that means I live, I live. Regardless of how long that is. That's what I'm gonna do. That's what I would do. Because this nation, at least my nation, needs to be defended for. The United States of America. Legally speaking, you don't have to write in the, okay? That's not in the words. It's just United States of America. Legal name. You know, that's the legal name. The legal name is United States of America. Okay? Okay. So it would be USA. Ooh, shocker. But they just add the because that's just how English is. With the titles. You know? I wish I was a Socrates. I wish I was a Plato. But I guess I am my own philosopher. But don't get too much into philosophy now. Because it does get into your mind. Like it gets into your head. It really gets into your head. You know, like it messes with your mind and everything, and it like keeps going and going and going and going and going and going. You know, spinning. It makes your head shake hard. You know? When I do this too, it makes your head spin. Does that mean you're more susceptible to be, does that mean you're more going to be gullible, like you're going to fall for lies, like you're going to believe in lies more? Yeah, maybe. But will you believe in things that are true? Also, maybe. But you have to actually know if that's the case, not just feel or have a vibe that it's the case. Now, I'm not saying that you can't have your feelings, but like doing the vibes stuff and not so healthy, okay? Alright? I'm being realistic here. Okay? Dogs barking. Life gets harder every day. I am a straight white man, to people's knowledge. And, that's just who I am. I'm somebody who's defaulted. And by white, I mean Caucasian white. So, there's that. Ooh. Michael, there's different types of white. Yes. Okay? Being white is an ethnicity of being Caucasian is an ethnicity of the race known as white. You know? You can be racially white. You can be ethnically white. You can be ethnically Caucasian, but you can't necessarily be racially Caucasian, because being Caucasian is a type of white person. To be more specific, North American whites. Okay? To be even more specific, the United States. Okay? But it is an ethnic group, so there are a lot of people that are from like Europe that are Caucasian. But most people who are both racially white and ethnically white tend to be from Europe, and they also tend to be, indigenous, because if you're from Europe and you're both racially and ethnically white, you're an indigenous person. You're an indigenous European or native European, which, by the way, is a thing. Just like how Native African is a thing. And technically speaking, every human who's ever lived on Earth is, in fact, African. On the technical level of, well, the human species originates from that continent. So, or if you want to be more specific, what is now South Africa. Okay? That is the oldest part of Africa. Because for about a quarter of human history, we lived in just South Africa, or what is mostly now South Africa, because the population was a lot smaller and history was a lot different. And then we mostly stretched out. And then about, I want to say 100 to about 70,000 years ago, we went out of Africa. And it was only about 1,000 years ago that we really started advancing big time, for the first time. And we advanced so much that every generation since it got bigger and bigger and bigger and better and better and better, and then more and more war, And then we got less and less war, and less war, and then less and less war. But here's the thing. We have less wars, but longer wars, for the wars that do exist. Technically, they're forever wars. Not really. I mean, yeah, these wars have been around for a while, but they're not really forever wars, okay? They do end. They do start and they do end. That's the thing. It's just, it takes a long time, So it seems like forever, but it's really not. It's really not. So. But all that I ask is that somebody who is a self-declared philosopher, well, not officially anyway, I don't have an official license or anything, which I kind of find ironic, because the same people who are mocked and hated and made fun of for having, philosophies that society needed, that when they died or got killed or got shamed, century later we're like, oh, or thousands of years later we're like, oh, now we might understand, or that we do understand. But don't worry, there were definitely like official philosophers, But we all know a true philosopher doesn't necessarily need to be official in order to have a philosophy. And we know this because a lot of them motherfuckers were just like doing shit. Like, I want to say one of the oldest versions of it would have been Socrates. That motherfucker's crazy, at least from how Plato tells it. He just, always asked questions, always wanted to know stuff, and taught stuff too. And then that eventually formed Western civilization, or what we now call the Western world. And it's called the Western world because it originates from Western Europe, and then that became the Western world. So there's that, I guess. You're thinking. Wiggling. I have nothing to worry about. I don't know why I was silent for so long. Whatever. Cartoon M&Ms. Man, I gotta stop trying to be so relevant or be so in touch. Because it's like, gotta start showing my true opinions. I gotta start showing my true opinions, man. Because if I don't, it's gonna cost me later. It's gonna cost me a lot worse than if I didn't. Like, I'm probably still gonna have problems regardless. Because they're kind of inevitable to a certain degree. But, like, you start lying about what you really believe. Ooh, man. Ooh, man. They gonna be mad. You know? They gonna be mad. That's why I try not to get too much into politics. I mean, I do have political beliefs. But, like, it's so obvious that it's, like, there. You know? Like, it's just so on the tippy top of things to poke and prod. You know? Like, you'll see me talk about religion more than I talk about politics. But, again, I do talk about it. And not just that, or sex. But, you know, there's other things like sports. You know, thinking for oneself. Video games. Fucking, man. I don't know, puzzles of some kind. Any kind. Really makes you think. Random noise. Whatever. Probably just me. I keep hearing random noise. It's confusing me. I don't know what that's about. But I'm not trying to get involved. You know? You gotta pick your wars, as the millennials tend to say. Pick the battles that you are picking, that you do get involved in. But that can work. But sometimes you're in a battle you didn't choose. But guess what? It's always optional to leave, I guess. But I don't know, I'm not you, dog. Life succumb to the end of the world, and I know what pain going down to the man who sold the world. Ooh, ooh, make funny noises. Weird internet slop. Was Adolf Hitler homosexual? That's a weird video. War of the Worlds. War of the Worlds. McDonald's, they said. Delicious, they said. And they spooked me with poop. Mouth sounds. Do Goyim really? Man. Really out there. Nigga, I don't know what I'm thinking. I'm just talking to myself. Like, what the fuck? Big fat gay boy. A lot of noise. I'm being serious, man. It's getting out of control. Gotta think. I gotta think. Why are you looking at me? Oh wait, yeah, you were watching this video. A lot of silent moments. Very awkward, isn't it? I don't know if I'm proud of myself either. Are you transgender, they say? They update the alphabet in Canada, I hear. At least in my time. But they're gonna probably bring more to it. Or less. Because you can only add so much to acronyms before people just stop caring. You know? This is the last true update before they kinda have to just stop. You know? You do any more after this and people are just gonna be done. Just gonna be fucking done. Done. Man. Why do even the ugly people in Hollywood movies have to look a 10 out of 10? Are you really that fucking judgmental? Also, if you're interested, if you watch this part of the video, check out the Band Labs. That Band Labs music account, if it's still on the YouTubes. You know, the link for it is still on the YouTubes. That kind of thing. If you can. You know, if that account still exists, obviously. Man, this video is a long one. Really out there. Pushing the pressure. Pushing your button. Look, I exist for a reason. And I just wanted to say, yeah, I'm talking here. You know? Getting it through. I shall see you later. Yeah, or maybe not.